Reserve has released new data comparing millennials to their parents when they were the exact same age, and they adjusted for inflation to see whether or not millennials really are at a significant disadvantage compared to generations before them. Now, of course, if you watch mainstream media, you hear a lot of commentary about millennials, like, oh, they're so entitled and they're lazy and they live in their parents' basements and they get trophies all the time. But the reality and the data actually prove something completely different. So, in terms of methodology, in this research, the analysts compared 25 to 34-year-olds in 2013, the most recent year available, to the same age group in 1989 after adjusting for inflation. So here's what they found. Millennials are actually earning around 20% less than their baby boomer parents. Millennials have less than half the net worth of boomers, and their home ownership rate is lower, while their student debt is drastically higher. So let's stop for a second. Millennials happen to be the first generation that's worse off than their parents are. And part of the reason why is a lot of them graduated into a melting economy. So in 2008, people who graduated had a very, very hard time finding a job. And so they went unemployed for a while. And then when they found a job, they got paid significantly lower than they would have if we didn't have an economic meltdown. So as a result, if you start at a lower income, it's really, really hard. Like you start at a disadvantage. And so you'll get raises along the way, but overall you're still going to make significantly less money because you started at much lower than other generations did. Now, white millennials who still earn much more than their Black or Latino peers have seen their incomes plummet the most relative to boomers. Okay, so there is a divide when it comes to minorities. Millennials are still likely to make, white millennials are still likely to make more money than Blacks and Latinos, but still they make significantly less than their parents did at their age. Again, adjusted for inflation.
And they're dropping at a quicker rate.
Yes.
So there's a number of trends outside the ones that Anna talked about. So student debt to me has become indentured servitude, right? So you pile up all this money that you owe people, and then what are you going to do? Leave the job that you have? Well, if you leave the job to pursue your dream or to do something else, well, you're in a load of trouble, friend, because you cannot get rid of those debts. They're the albatross hanging around your neck. That is the one kind of debt that you cannot cancel. Think about that. Why is that? Why can Trump cancel all of his debts when he goes into bankruptcy? And millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars in debt, just poof, gone, right? And on super important projects. But why is student debt the one thing you cannot cancel? It's because they want you to be indentured servants. They want you to have no choice at all. It's partly about the banks. You have no power, so the banks can do this to you, whereas the other people like Trump have lobbies that are fight for them, lawyers that are fight for them, et cetera. And it's partly because you set up a system where you are beholden to the corporations. And if you don't work for them, well, then you're in enormous trouble. And then you've got a credit card culture that has arisen. I think this is a smaller part of it, but it's some portion of it, where we're all used to piling up debt. But, you know, back in the baby boomer generation, the credit cards were not nearly as prevalent, and you didn't have as much debt because of that. And then finally, I think the most important part is this 40, 50-year trend where wages have not kept up with productivity. So the American worker is tremendously productive. They are just as productive as they have ever been, and there is data to show that. But wages have flatlined.
They've flatlined, and inflation, it hasn't kept up with inflation at all. So just to give you, anecdotal evidence, a perfect example. So my parents, right? My parents bought a home in our neighborhood for around $150,000. Home prices in the same neighborhood right now are at least $500,000 or more, right? And we're not talking about a wealthy area. We're talking about Reseda, California, right? And so if you think about stagnating wages, or the fact that millennials are right now earning 20% less than their parents are, and then you consider the fact that housing prices are this outrageous, how are you going to argue that millennials are the entitled ones that are just whining all the time? No, no, no. The system is set up in such a way that we feel like we're drowning. Like, it doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter how much you push yourself to have, a successful, stable career. Even if you do have a successful, stable career, you're still at a significant disadvantage.
And so we're not saying that there aren't any millennials that act entitled, but usually they're the ones that are far wealthier, right? They have a sense of like, what do you mean? I have a right to this, this, and this. But most millennials don't have that sense of entitlement because they never felt entitled to anything.
Right.
They were behind the 8 ball all along. So I feel like baby boomers have this weird like bitterness towards millennials. And the old media is constantly like, oh, millennials, they cost the election, they did this, and they're lazy, and they're entitled, and they don't know anything. When in reality, no, they grew up on the internet. They know a lot more than the older generations do. And now they're facing, like, so a lot of baby boomers, et cetera, and even earlier than that, they had the GI Bill. They went to college for free or for very low amount of money. Now millennials are loaded down with all this debt, and they're like, why don't you work harder? Hey, you didn't have the debt that I did, right? In fact, I got to work harder than you to pay off that debt.
So let's discuss that a little bit more, too, because it's not like students today are paying the same amount of money as, generations before them paid for college, right? So again, adjusted for inflation, these numbers are incredible. For boomers in 1989, the average tuition at a four-year public college was $3,454 in today's dollars. Today, that figure has risen to $9,410. So you see a huge difference there. And to say, oh, we all have an equal footing and one generation isn't getting anywhere, whereas previous generations got far, is ridiculous. It's just not accurate.
Man, I am old. I was in college in 1989. and by the way, wakey, older generations, how can you deny the facts? When we were going to college, it cost a lot less, and you know it, and it's in the facts. So it's now basically tripled. So then don't yell at your kids when you put them in a much worse spot. And one of the ways that you did that is that you let corporations capture our government and lower our wages, so to the point where you're not getting the benefit of that productivity. So your kids are working. I know it because it's a fact. Productivity is as high as it has ever been, but you're not getting the wages for that. That is trillions of dollars of value that has been moved from the American worker to multinational corporations that captured our government. And the people that are feeling it the most are millennials. That is why they are the most in favor of a revolution, because this system is not working for them. They're absolutely right. You need to listen to them instead of complaining about them. Let's go take on the corporate media. Come join us, be a member, and change the media. tytnetwork.com/join.